thank you so much for coming to the Poetry Project tonight. It's our first reading of our full 2013 series, Wednesday night reading series. If you need a newsletter, please take one. They're free and on the back desk, and it has a calendar of events through the end of November. And just a quick announcement about what's coming up. On Monday, we have our Erica Doyle and Christopher Stackhouse reading. And a week from tonight, we have Patty McCarthy and Kevin Barone reading. And you can also, if you don't want to take a newsletter, look online at poetryproject.org, where all of our events are listed as well. So tonight, I'll be joined by Joanne Wasserman, who will be guest introducing Lynn Tillman, but I'm going to start out by introducing Paul Maliszewski. And I love this book. I love it, Prayer and Parable. Thank you, Paul, for writing it, and thank you, Lynn, for turning me on to Paul's work about a year ago. Unnameable Books is once again our bookseller this season, which is to say that if any of you are wondering about what to read next, I think this is it. So there's also a wide array of Lynn's books back there, so please take a moment at the break to peruse the book table. Okay, so I read some of the reviews of this book online and noticed that some of the reviewers, even while being complimentary, had some kind of issue with not knowing what was going on all the time. And that's when I thought, oh, of course, that's why Paul is coming to the Poetry Project, to read, where readers and writers of poetry and seasoned listeners congregate, and actually I would say find it in a more of a natural state, not to be in a state of not knowing. And this state even seems to be one of Paul's themes, better expressed in a line from his prayer for an answer when an answer eludes. Quote, "Was nothing ever truly clear between two people?" End of quote. How deep does sympathy run, or is it at best provisional? His writing excels at getting into the cocoon that people, a couple of people or groups of people, build around themselves. His stories are so well structured, not only in the careful use of language. He says in an interview in the Paris Review, "I want the words to do all of the work." End quote. But in how suggestive they are of systems of psychological forces that underlie human behavior. I immediately thought of Freud famously stating, "The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind." Paul's often nameless characters aren't impersonal. They are letting the words do the work of trying to articulate their often hard to articulate lives. And sometimes I don't know means I don't have the words just yet. Please welcome Paul Maliszewski to the stage.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm going to read a few short pieces, not from the book actually, but from this magazine, Apology, and these pieces were recently published. The first one is called Whole. My father was planting his new tree in the backyard. He had out his post-hole digger and the spade with the long handle. I sat in the grass watching him tugging at shoots of the St. Augustine until they broke. He must have dug for a while, but then he left to go get something from the garage, and I went over to the hole. I hadn't been able to see how deep he'd dug. I was a kid, probably in the second grade, I guess. Anyway, as I looked down the hole, I thought, get in. I don't know why, it just seemed like the thing to do. To see how deep it was, to really see, I had to climb down. Of course, I couldn't get out. The ground was too soft. I tried to get a hand up, but got just a fistful of soil. I dug my foot in, and the dirt gave under my weight. The hole was about as deep as I was tall, maybe a little deeper. I looked up out of the hole, and then I just looked at the dirt in front of me. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I knew my father would return. It wouldn't be long. I worried that he'd be angry, pissed to find me messing around yet again. But when he came back, he laughed at me, down in that hole, looking up at him. He ran off to find my mother, so she could see what I'd done. Then they both were there, and my father reached down and pulled me free. This is a story called Presentation. He chose to do his report on Ireland because his mother's family, some of them, were from there. He got a poster board and cut it into two halves and colored one half to look like the flag of Ireland, and drew on the other half a map of the country, copying it as best he could from some book, making the coastlines and putting dots where the major cities were located. When his turn came, he went to the front of the class and set his visual aids on a table. Visual aids were what they called them then, and he was careful to place his face down as he didn't want his classmates to see them before it was time. He sat on a stool next to the table. Some of the students had stood when they gave their reports and seemed fine with that, but he preferred to sit. He looked out on the class, the teacher there, sitting at a student's desk, smiling, encouraging him to proceed. And so he spoke about what he had learned of Ireland, and at some point he turned to his visual aids, picked the top one off the stack and held it in front of him like a fence he was peering over. "This is the flag," he said, "of Ireland." Lots of laughter then, even from the teacher. He looked down and saw, of course, that he was holding the map instead. He put it on the table, and then he took up the flag, and when the laughter petered out, he continued. Later, when it came time to show the map, he held it up and said, "And here's the map of Ireland." But this guy, he can't remember his name, blonde kid though, very pale, freckly, and with braces. This guy speaks right up. "Don't you mean flag?" he says. And for a second, or maybe for longer, he thought, did I screw it up again? What did I say? His face did something too, the look of it, and the students must have sensed that what he was thinking, seeing in his expression this plain, ashen horror, the growing humiliation over a small hot thing. They were laughing too, of course, really going this time. What a blast these presentations were turning out to be. He tried to go on then, but he couldn't speak. The teacher shushed the students. "It's okay," she said to him. "You said the right thing. He was only joking." She looked at the guy. What he remembers about this guy, the joker, is how earlier that year he had peed in his pants. It happened in the same class, world history. This was in the 9th grade. Nobody was doing that in the 9th grade. Who knows why the guy did it? Some weird thing, something bad. Darkness, maybe at home. One never knows. But whatever it was, that's all he remembers about the guy. About the time there was pee filling up his seat and dripping down, pooling under his desk, and how the guy had to leave, go home, his jeans soaked. And then a custodian came in, and for days after the carpet was wet, a wide lake encircling the desk where he'd sat. But with his joke, the guy pushed all that aside, gone. He remembers thinking just that, thinking, I'm a joke to the guy who pees his pants. Some quick shift had occurred, a realignment, as if a new part had clicked into place. This guy was now funny, he made people laugh. In later years, when he had to give a presentation, if he had visual aids, he made little notes to himself on the back, notes that only he could see, penciled there in the upper right-hand corner, reminders not to make the same mistake again. This is a short story called Patty. Patty really wanted to know what a pearl necklace was. It was lunchtime, and we were in line at the snack bar, and Patty was talking to some guy I didn't know, an upperclassman probably, and she was saying how she had figured out what everything was on the list, but not the pearl necklace. Tell me, she said, I need to know everything before the first week of school is over. The list was news to me. I assumed it had something to do with sex, though, the way everything meant something else. Maybe it was just her whole manner. Patty was pretty, one of the prettier girls in the 6th grade, for sure. She wore Jordache jeans and a shirt with shiny snaps on it. The one odd thing about her was her low hips. It was like her legs were too short for her body, or else her body was too long for her legs. It was kind of weird. Anyway, she was hopping up and down in front of this guy saying, tell me, please, but he just shook his head, grinning. If you know, she said, you have to tell me. You do, you totally do. The guy just laughed. You're so innocent, he said. We moved up in line. Patty and the guy were in the middle one, and I was on the outside. When I got to the front, I ordered a pizza boat, which was like half a piece of French bread covered with pizza sauce and some white cheese, and then 4 panes of pepperoni. I lived that year on pizza boats. At the end of each week, if I'd saved all my change, I bought a drumstick, which was an ice cream cone, where the ice cream was coated with chocolate and studded with peanuts. All right, I've never done this before, but I'm going to read a poem. It's called Capital. In the evenings, they walked through new homes, half-built and framed out, places outlined in studwood with tar paper roofs. He liked the patios and the sunrooms, liked being out back and seeing through the whole house, as if it were a special power to render walls invisible. His girlfriend was good at guessing what room they were in. She counted closets, baths, the wide plywood stairways. They carried a leash and rehearsed this story about how they were looking for their dog. Their dog had got loose and run this way, they thought, toward the construction, not that anyone asked. 3 women in visors and tennis togs huffed up a hill. Joggers padded past. A woman entered her house and then looked back, reconsidering. Across the road, some guy was talking into his phone, pacing the length of his lawn. They walked under trees, oaks he believed, their trunks banded against beetles, roots puddling over sidewalks. She had lived here once when she was young, Colville, Selwyn, Cherokee Place. They stopped before another new home, an idea high up a long drive. This one, she said, is for the bank president. As a kid, she called him Uncle. They stood together, staring through what would be a window. He thought of money then, of capital, finance, and interest, of what they had and would never have. She asked him what he was thinking. He shrugged, didn't know. He was just trying to be, he said, realistic. This is a story called Desire. He wanted to swim underwater. He was in the pool with his wife and son, bobbing, floating, swimming off a bit and then back. It was the first time he'd been in water and he didn't know how long. Since college, he figured, but then he remembered the hotel pool, their honeymoon 6 years ago that month. There was an Arab family, Gulf Arabs, his wife said, the women draped in chadors, like 4 black geese minding a boy while he swam. The boy, just an ordinary boy in t-shirt trunks. They saw the family around in the restaurant, at the pool, sitting in the lobby. The boy had a sister who stayed upstairs in a room overlooking the pool. She came onto the balcony and then hurried inside, banging on the window and shouting something to her brother. He waved and then leapt into the water. Now he and his wife had 2 kids, boys, the baby back at the house, napping, they hoped, his mother-in-law there. He liked being in the water, just the 3 of them, the accustomed ease of it, the familiarity, how it used to be, he thought. He and his wife took turns holding their son up, supporting him. He had those floaty things on his arms, but either they didn't work or nobody trusted them. The husband looked at his wife, hair pulled back, loose strands gone curly from the humidity, and her breasts above the water, full from the milk, the delicate blue veining she hated, she said, but he couldn't see what the big deal was. It was part of her and beautiful, and he felt desire, this stirring. He touched the small of her back just above the swimsuit, trying to imply all this, trying to impart it. He loved her bottom. Bottom was what he thought, though ass was what he meant and wished to say. He wanted to transmit to her how happy he was, a floating body, so light, almost massless, and how every time he swam, he thought, this makes me so happy. The water, everything. It was that simple, the feeling, the thought. He was bouncing on his feet, treading in place when he asked his son, do you want to see Daddy swim underwater? Do you want to see if he can make it to the other side? He pointed across the pool. It wasn't far, not Olympic distance or whatever it was called. It was just a little pool in the little development where they rented a house near the beach. His wife said this she had to see. He breathed in a few times, deep breaths, and then went under. The first thing that went wrong was that he misjudged how shallow the pool was and pushed off into the bottom, his knuckles scraping, gouged up pretty good. Then his swim trunks, which never did fit, started to slip, and he reached to tug them back. When he started swimming again, he'd lost his momentum, what he had, and was nearly out of air. He pushed it, though, kept going, pulling himself through the water. He felt it in his chest first. He was getting nowhere. It was harder than he remembered swimming. He came up for air, gasping while trying not to gasp, his lungs aching to breathe. Something was wrong, he thought, his throat. He was near the middle of the pool, closer to the middle than the other side, really. His wife laughed. "Way to go, old man," she said. His son started in and laughing, yelling, slapping the surface of the water. "Old man," he said, "old man." And this is the last one I'll read. This is a poem called Work. Someone told me Raymond Carver wrote his best stuff while sitting in his car, parked maybe in his garage or on some street. That part I don't know. But when I first heard, I figured he didn't have a desk or even a table. Only now, married with 2 little boys, do I get it. I take our older son to school. We talk about birds on the rooftop forming lines, the pigeon school we call it, wondering what they're studying today. When I get home, I sit sometimes in the car for a few seconds. I stay at home with the baby. The electrician, the plumber, they all make the same joke. "You playing Mr. Mom today?" they ask. Every day, I say, I bounce the baby in my arms. He likes being carried like chandeliers, light fixtures, toys with faces. "On," he says, pointing at a lamp. The plumber or whoever shakes his head like, "Boy, it must be nice not having to work or nothing." From the garage, I can see inside the house, into my office, quote unquote, my desk, the piles of paper and books, bills, boxes, the calendar where for weeks I write nothing down. The car is clean enough anyway, and it's quiet there and good, the seat comfortable, the garage dark. A person could get a little work done, I guess, spread out his thoughts, count them, sort, just listen to the engine ticking as it cools.